This is a sufficient assumption question. We can tell because if we have this assumption, then the conclusion is going to be properly drawn, or the assumption allows the conclusion to be properly drawn. So if we have this assumption, then we're going to have a valid argument. It needs to guarantee our conclusion. It is sufficient. So what we typically do here is we find the conclusion, we find the premises, we try to link them up with a linking assumption, and then when we say that linking assumption strongly, we're hoping that it guarantees the conclusion. That's our end game here. We got to guarantee the conclusion. We're also looking for conditional statements that we can link together. We'll be looking for repeating terms and that kind of stuff, although we're not going to get it here. Instead, we get a conclusion that says every year the vaccine is going to have to be for a different strain. And we're talking specifically about vaccinating high-risk individuals. We get some background information up top, but what we're told, the real meaty part of what we're told, the premise here, is that each year's vaccination is only going to protect against the strain that is deemed most likely to be prevalent. So each year our vaccine only protects against the most likely prevalent strain, and for that reason we're saying each year we're going to have to vaccinate against a different strain. And so there's a gap here. You might see it right away, or it might help to play devil's advocate. Like, how is it possible that each year we vaccinate against the most prevalent strain, and yet we don't have to do a different strain every year? How could we accept the premise and fight the conclusion? Well, what if the most prevalent strain is the same strain 2 years in a row, right? Then we wouldn't have to vaccinate for a different strain. And so we're assuming that doesn't happen. We're assuming that it's never the same strain twice. In other words, we're assuming that each year the most prevalent strain, or the most likely prevalent strain, is a different strain. And if that's true, then each year the vaccine is going to have to protect against a different strain. So we just want to say this assumption nice and strongly. That's going to guarantee the conclusion. It sort of links this idea to that idea. Let's go ahead and check out the answers. It's important to keep your filter question in mind here. Anytime we do sufficient assumption questions, the filter question is, does that guarantee the conclusion? And so answer choice A tells us that the number of people in this group doesn't change significantly from year to year. But that doesn't guarantee our conclusion that we need to have a different strain every year. If the most likely prevalent strain is the same 3 years in a row, we could use the same vaccine 3 years in a row. We're not going to need a different strain. And so the assumption is that the most likely prevalent strain changes every year. It's not about the size of the group. The group size could be big or small. It totally doesn't matter. The likelihood of a serious flu epidemic varies from year to year. We don't need that, and that's not enough. It's not a guarantor. And one of the dangers with sufficient assumption is that you start processing it like necessary assumption, right? I accidentally almost slipped into that. This isn't something we need, but that's not even the right question to ask. The question is, does this guarantee the conclusion? Does this mean we have to have a different strain every year? And no, it doesn't. It's totally irrelevant. Like whether or not we have a serious flu epidemic doesn't tell us whether we're going to have to change our strain or not. No vaccine for the flu protects against more than one strain of the virus. I could see this being tempting because you're like, oh, what if the vaccine that we give this high-risk group protects against 5 different strains? Then the most prevalent virus could change year after year, but the same vaccine could take care of it because it's protecting against 5 different strains. Well, that's prevented by the premises, right? We're told that this vaccination is only going to protect against one strain of the flu. So other vaccinations might protect against more strains of the flu. This isn't something that we need, but it's also not enough. It's neither necessary nor sufficient. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to have a different vaccine every year, right? It's not saying that the most likely prevalent strain will be different every year. And so C is not a guarantor. And it's got to be out of scope. It can't be talking about our vaccine because we were told in the premises that our vaccine only protects against one strain. And so if you remember that or recognize that, you can't fight the premises. The premises are facts that you have to accept. And so our vaccine, this particular vaccine, is not like the vaccines described in C. It's not something that can protect against multiple strains. Each year, the strain of flu deemed most likely to be prevalent will be one that had not previously been deemed most likely to be prevalent. That's a long-winded way of saying this assumption. The most likely prevalent strain will be different each year. So this is pretty anticipatable. We should be hunting for this idea, and if we are, then we won't be as tempted to get bogged down by A, B, or C. So 2 key lessons from this. If you've anticipated an answer choice, you should go on a hunt for it. Don't waste time until you've looked at all 5 answer choices. And also be careful about switching out of gear and treating it like a necessary question. A lot of these kind of seem like necessary answers, but they're not really set up to guarantee your conclusion. Oh yeah, and a third lesson here is don't fight premises. It's possible that other vaccines protect against multiple strains, but the one we're talking about doesn't, and there's no way to change that. So each year's vaccine will have fewer side effects. Well, this sounds like it's immediately getting out of scope. This isn't going to guarantee that we have to change it up every year. Only D guarantees that we have to change it up every year. Maybe that's the best filter question here. Does this guarantee that we have to change it up every year? And D does, nothing else does.